Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Holly McCaw with the School Communicators Network, and we are kicking off our fourth Lunch and Hour. You can tweet during today's Lunch and Hour. Again, just use the hashtag SCN Lunch and Hour. Share what you've learned with other people who may not be able to be on here today. And so we'll continue the talk on there. As you guys are signing on, kind of give your name and where you're from. We have several states represented today. There's several from Michigan on already. But just so we all have an idea of who's with us today. And we're so excited to have our guest, David Zach, who is a futurist. David, hi. Thanks so much.
Hi, Holly.
As we kind of get people to scroll in here, let's just start with your background. First of all, futurist has to be one of the coolest titles ever. So how do you become a futurist? Give us a little bit of idea of your background.
Okay, so I am from Monroe, Wisconsin, a little farm town south of Madison. And in high school, I had a course called The Future. And it was all about how to think about trends and what's coming. I had no idea it would be a career choice. So I was going to be a lawyer. And then I did a really smart thing in college. I got a job in the law library, and I found out what lawyers do for a living and realized. And there was a magazine that you can still get called The Futurist. And in there was an ad for the earn a Master's of Science in Studies of the Future at the University of Houston. So I thought, well, that's a good alternative. I didn't know what I was going to do with it because thought, well, I'd still go be a lawyer. And I got to Milwaukee to finish up the degree with an internship at Johnson Controls, helping to do technological research. And because it's such an unusual title, when anybody would meet me, they'd ask what you do, and I'd say a futurist. And either a really blank look, and they'd look at their watch and walk away, or they'd ask me to speak at their Rotary Club for a little while. So I started giving speeches, and I maybe did like 10, 15 of them. And without warning, somebody gave me a $40 honorarium. So it was a hobby that to get extra spending money, and it got out of control.
Wow, I had no idea that was an actual track of an actual degree.
Yes.
Very cool.
Is still going at the University of Houston at the main campus.
Did people wait for you to bring out your crystal ball? Or do they wish you had one? So tell us a little bit about what it means to be a futurist. I mean, what are sort of the basics that you share with people? And when we talk about fads, trends, and principles, are those kind of the three major things?
Well, the most important thing to point out right away is everybody is a futurist. Everybody has a future. And the question is, are you simply letting it just roll over you? Or are you looking forward and anticipating possibilities, making choices? And that is the essence of education. It is preparation. It is making choices. And then sometimes it's delaying gratification. I don't know about you, but I never liked school. Students. But I knew what its rewards were. And that notion of fads, trends, and principles, that's sort of a concept I came up with in terms of when you're looking out there at the future or the present, what do you pay attention to? And fads are light, they're fluffy, they're fun, they're of the moment. And you can either ignore them or you can have fun with them. But you don't want to embrace them. You don't, as a school district, want to be taken in by something that is here today and very demanding of attention, but then gone tomorrow and replaced by something very similar. Trends, you work with trends. And that's about things where there is an ongoing, over time, more of, less of. And you work with them in the sense of that's the playing field. So the trend of greater education, the trend towards, for instance, the recognition of STEM, things like that, where you put effort into a goal. And then so that trends cross time. Principles are about things that transcend time in the sense of that they're true, and they're true whether you recognize them or not, whether you ignore them or not. And so a good way of having a frame on a principle is there's some document, I can't remember which one was, says we hold these truths to be self-evident. And then what words would you put behind that? But a sense of true, regardless of whether or not anybody, whether there's so many people that say, well, that's no longer relevant. That's outdated. Well, is it outdated or is it just inconvenient?
Right. Because there are some things, those are kind of the non-negotiables, right? Those things that are always going to be there and be a factor in whatever decisions we make.
So when you think about a school district or schools or education, families, community, is there anything about those that we say, this we're going to stand by, this is true, we're not going to give this up, we're going to stand upon this to say, you shall not cross, you shall not let this go away.
Mm-hmm. So when you look into the future of education, what do you see?
Do you want to narrow that down?
What's a trend, I guess? Let's look at a trend. Is there a specific trend you certainly see?
Well, here's a trend that has been ongoing, we're in the midst of, where there is this increasing demand that it be about technology, that it be about bringing more and more technology, more and more screens. And there has to be some recognition that something is missing. I'm a big fan of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And then they separate it a little bit and slick this A in there for art. Yeah. Great. And I'm a firm believer in it. But I also have this response to it that I will now pronounce for you called, and let me spell it for you, PPPTHB. So it's the Bronx tier of education. Here's the point. STEM raises questions that STEM cannot answer. And so that PPPTHB, prose, poetry, philosophy, theology, history, and biography. Those help us ask and answer questions. And sometimes it isn't always important that you have an answer to a question as long as you're asking it. Because there are things that we simply, ask the question, what is the meaning of life? It doesn't have a good answer. It has lots of good answers, but simply asking the question and exploring the possibilities, that takes us very far. There is there's a Twitter handle, I think it's called Libyan Art, and it's for liberal arts. And they post some neat things there about, like for instance, 1/3 of corporate CEOs were liberal arts majors, as opposed to business majors or engineers. I hate the fact that the world has been divorced from, we take science and put it over here, and we put the arts and the literature over here. And that's absurd. That's schizophrenic in the sense of schizophrenia means a break. You break apart the world, and the things that should be talking with each other should be engaged. And when they aren't, things don't work.
Do you think that as the trend of STEM and STEAM go on, though, they've already put the A, right, in STEM. So do you think you'll see that meshing? I mean, I really feel like when I look at our district, there's a lot of those little things going on where you're really doing a cross-curricular, projects and things like that. Do you think that will come with the trend?
Sure, and I hope so. One hopes for the rise of truth, as it were. And what I always want is for people to know how to defend things. And so, yes, let's defend the necessity of studying STEM. But it always has to be countered by saying, well, but this is of equal value. You can't have people simply trained in technology, only looking at numbers and not looking at letters. And a good metaphor, and I think we chatted about this last week, is they have to dance. And so think of Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. you know, and that how great they looked together. And it's when they dance together, when there's this back and forth. And it's all these, you know, paradox is such a valuable thing for us to understand. Strength and beauty, form and function, art and science, that all of these go together, and one is not better than the other. But when they can learn to dance, that's a concept that we can bring in helping to articulate why these are important together.
So are those the things, you know, if you were able to put on the curriculum director or director of instruction hat for education, are those the kinds of things that you would introduce that you think maybe is needed, is making sure those things come in to join the dance per se?
I think there's lots of room in terms of doing things differently. Mm-hmm. And so I don't, and part of the problem is we have all these school subjects separated. You know, and one of the worst questions I have ever asked in my life was, are you going to take off for spelling? You know, like, no, they all of these things should apply together. You go outside of school in what other people call the real world. Right. Nothing is, you know, these things aren't necessarily separate. They do go together, and they do have to have cooperation, collaboration. You know, so I kind of like in a lot of the business world, you have all this cross-pollination and all this, you know, the sense of teamwork. And, you know, it's been a few years since I've taught in the classroom, so I don't have the day-to-day experience of how it works today. Mm-hmm. But anytime you can find a way of crossing boundaries. Leo Tolstoy said, all great literature is one of two stories. A man goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. And it's a great metaphor of, this is how we make stories. Mm-hmm. And stories rule the world. And education, the essence of it, is, in a sense, telling stories. You know, now we just measure things.
Right. And telling stories is what most of us on the line today, you know, do in our jobs as school PR people and marketers. So perfect tie-in right there. So what do you see? You know, I think in one of the videos I was watching that our attention span is now 9 seconds or something like that. So what's the trend in PR and marketing, especially when it's so difficult to get people's attention, let alone keep it?
Well, there is, so a friend of mine who is another futurist, you know, there are more than just his name is Daniel Burris. And one of the things that he used to say is there is nothing more powerful than the spoken word. And so the ability to speak, the ability to write, the ability to present, I think those are exceptionally important skills for people to develop. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this whole notion of, you know, my precious, we put so much of our attention into these things that we are losing the ability to communicate and to empathize. I have this great New Yorker cartoon where it's got two young girls and they're laying on the bed and they're looking at their screens, and one of them says, you know, the first time I make eye contact with somebody, I want it to be with someone special. You know, how did this happen?
Right.
And so, you know, I believe it was St. Francis who said you must forgive yourself every day. And so we have these new tools. And when you have new tools, you have to have new rules. Otherwise, the tools get to rule. Mm-hmm. And so forgive ourselves. Forgive yourself for making mistakes, for putting too much time and attention into these things. But how do we learn to say, all right, we're going to turn it off? We're now at a point in our culture, in our economy, where we have to learn to turn them on. Which also means that we now are at a point where we have to learn to turn them off.
Right.
Stop. Go outside. Our behavior with the technology is now indistinguishable from either an addiction or much, much worse, worship.
Very true. When technology, though, is so much a part of our target audience, it has to be a trend for us to use it.
Sure.
As much as we wish things were fads, right? In that respect. So how do we do that without losing that human touch? You know, what's any idea what the balance could be? I mean, we've got to use social media. We just have to. We have to use, right, exactly. And technology is allowing us to actually speak to each other today, right? So where's the balance, or is there maybe something else we can look to use social media to springboard more actual conversation?
Sure. And so two terms that I bring into conversations about this sort of topic: elegance and eloquence. So presentation of self, presentation of ideas. It's learning to use the technology really well, but also how do we present it, or in a sense, offer it so that as it comes in, it's really well designed, that the goal in terms of presenting any kind of information to a parent, to a district, to other teachers is, when I get it, do I look at it and go, ah, or do I look at it and go, ugh? and so there is a whole science of information architecture. How do we design the presentation of information so that it is easily consumed, well designed, that has a sense of aesthetics or elegance to it? There is a marvelous little book that was written back in the 1930s called In Praise of Shadows by Junichiro Tanizaki, a Japanese writer. And in there, he has this marvelous little phrase: without shadows, there can be no beauty. And what I take from that is, like in the West, here in the States, we light everything up. We make everything obvious. We make everything exposed. But in that Japanese sense of aesthetics, shadows are essential. You can still look, you can still discover, but what do you put up front? So here is one of the marvelous elements in that sense of multiculturalism. What can we learn from a different culture in terms of how do they present? How do they offer that? Gar Reynolds wrote a book called, I can't remember what the name of it is right now, Presentation Zen. And it's all about how do you design information, a slide deck, with elegance, for eloquence, just to kind of ease it, present it. It's a neat book, and he also has a video. You can get a little box that has a video, a DVD, and some other resources in terms of how you design with that in mind.
Well, and that's always a challenge for us too, because, to get the attention, you have to make it look nice when you think about design, but also be creative in your storytelling. You got to hit the heart. You have to make it, hit people, and have them have some sort of effect, I guess. How do we avoid the pitfalls of the fads? How do we, is there a way to kind of identify? Do we just tread lightly?
So you always look for what's the time horizon. And one of the important things is that fads are always pushed. They're marketed. And a fad never identifies itself as a fad. It identifies itself as a trend. Because, like if I say that's really trendy, sounds a lot better than saying that's really fatty. And, we can't even figure out how to say that word.
Right.
But you always have to look at, what does this point towards? I am a big, big believer in the value of fads, in that a fad is about a moment. So when you think about it in its best sense, a fad is a moment of the heart. And we can all think of moments in our lives where time went away. And it was just that moment. And quite often with that other person. That's the essence of it. And then marketers got a hold of that concept and used it to sell. Eric Hoffer, one of my favorite writers, said you can never get enough of what you really don't need.
So true.
Oddly, we have an entire economy based on that. And buy, sell. I think that you have to look at, does this fad connect to something else? Is it pushing or being supportive of a particular trend, like consumerism? People have said, well, are these things fads or trends? Well, this is an iPhone 6. It's not a 6S. So this model, and I'll say, so is this up to date? And when I say it's a 6 or even a 6S, they'll go, no, because they know something else is coming.
Okay.
This is like a fad on that continuum of a trend. But you can always go, all right, so how does this relate to a principle? So in the one sense, it relates to the fact that we like being able to have communication. We like being able to reach out and connect at any point. That really feeds our need for safety, security, as well as for knowing, for finding things out. So, this is the equivalent of being on the savannah and we're searching out for dangerous animals. We want to know, is the world okay?
So would it, I think that's one thing you think of a fad, people like to jump on it right away. And then sometimes they kind of regret doing that. How do you know whether to sort of seize the moment, if you want to say? Because if the fad is in a moment, maybe you can find a way to successfully take advantage of it. But how do you know when to just kind of to leave it alone too? So it can kind of play out both ways.
Well, part of it is, how much is it going to cost you?
True.
Both in terms to enter, but almost how much will it cost you if it goes away? And I was telling you that I was reading some books about Warren Buffett. And it's surprising that you read through his stuff. And it's very much about fads, trends, and principles. And specifically in terms of, you can never know enough. You can never have precise, exact information about the future. You have things that will pop up and say, I am the future. But, is it Oz, the great Oz behind the curtain? That, that's all show, but no go.
Right.
I think that we have to, asking the sense of, what does it cost? And then what does it cost over time? You and I have talked about, there's a book called Curious by Ian Leslie, which is, I think, one of the most fascinating books I've read in years. And the problem he points out is, you present a question to Google, and Google answers the question before you're finished asking it. That's absurd. And if you are old enough, and everybody on the phone or on this call old enough to remember having to search for things before the internet. And what it did is, you ended up having to dig through things, and you found all sorts of things that weren't related. But some of you would kind of, oh, that's interesting, look here, or you follow that. And what it does is it helps prepare in your brain a sense of context of the world. And when Google now gives you an answer, it drills a hole in the information, grabs the answer, never touches the side, and hands you an answer in ignorance. So you have exactly what you're looking for, but it's not connected to anything.
Right.
So you're going to successfully evaluate, is it a fad? Is it a trend? You have to have more context, because otherwise you get seduced by really sophisticated packaging. It's always good to ask, is there a profit motive behind the profit motive?
Right.
If I do this, if I go along with your forecast about the future, are you getting rich? With someone gaining power, what's really going on? You know, let's pay attention to the man behind the curtain. Exactly. What is this connected to?
Do a little research.
Yeah, imagine that.
Maybe an encyclopedia and not Google right now. When we talk about some of those things, speaking of the past, what part does the past play? I mean, is that kind of our research? But what part does the past play in your thinking about the future?
The past is prelude. It's a vast early warning system. And I believe it was Karl Marx who said that, you know, history repeats itself. The first time as a tragedy and the second time as a farce. There are patterns, and the patterns emerge from our humanity. So the context in some ways is always different, but we're not that different. So you can see repetition. And what I love about history is Will Durant, the historian, he said, history is rich enough to prove anything. So if that's true, and it is, it means that if we read deeply enough and broadly enough, we have a sense of, we have seen this before. Now, the circumstances may be different, the players are different, but some of this has been seen before, and we can learn the lessons of history by trying to look into this. And Will and Ariel Durant wrote that 11-volume story of civilization, and they summarized it in a 101-page book called The Lessons of History. And I love books like that to give you a sense of, here are the broad lessons. Here are the principles that we can share, we can learn, and we can explore.
I just want to bring up your love of books. Tell us about some of your favorite, well, you've already mentioned a couple of them that maybe we should pick up, but you read a lot. How does that help you? I mean, I guess that's part of your research for what you do, but what would be your advice? I mean, people are always like, oh, I need a good book on this or a good book on that. You're such a huge reader, aren't you?
I am. I don't speak for a living. I read for a living. And then every once in a while, I get a chance to talk about what I've been reading. And I read quite diversely. And so I have over 2,000 books in my home. Wow. But I also have a Kindle and I have a Kobo. And Kobo, the neat thing about Kobo, it's an alternative platform. You know, it's an alternative e-reader, but they work with local bookstores. So you buy the book through the Kobo site, but you link it to your bookstore and then they get a commission.
Well, that's nice.
You know, if there is one cultural institution we cannot lose, it's bookstores and libraries. So, and the neat thing about the e-readers is anything before like 1929 is in the public domain. So since the arrival of e-readers, I've read a ton of classics. And anything, see, here's a thing about the word futuristic. We think it's this, right? Well, this is already outdated. But we always think it's technology. Here's the best definition of futuristic. It is that which has future value. So you can look at institutions. You can look at art. You can look at children. Hey, that's futuristic.
We have those.
Yeah, and they are, you know, you invest in the future, but it's a neat way of looking at it. Futuristic is that which has future value. This does not have future value. What those books do and the ideas in them. So the two most interesting books that I read last year, Curious by Ian Leslie, and then, I always get a laugh out of this one, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. And
I've heard a lot about that book lately.
But it's this whole thing of, G.K. Chesterton said, you know, one thing is to be satisfied is you can always want more, or you can be satisfied with less. Mm-hmm. And everything you have to at some level pay attention to. And here's the sort of the kicker with this. In this day and age, and your occupations particularly have to know this, attention is the most valuable resource you own. So you have to respect it. You have to protect it. Mm-hmm. And so, when you think about your clients, as it were, the parents, the community, the teachers, the students, is your task is to protect their attention. Meaning, don't just throw things out at them, but how do you help them focus? How do you help them understand and get the essence, the essentials, things like that?
That kind of falls into another topic, when the emphasis on speed of communication, it's much more important these days to get things out quicker. How do you see that impacting, though, our future or our present?
Mm-hmm. Well, there is this immediate sense of going, oh, I have to know this, or I have to say something right away. Mm-hmm. But can you have a little bit of patience saying, all right, we know this is important, but give us a moment to think this through rather than simply reacting and then having to retract. And a really good thing that I did as a professional speaker that was also incredibly scary is I took improv theater training.
Oh, yes.
And, so I've given, almost over 1,500 speeches through the years, and I'm pretty comfortable in front of an audience. That's not the same as standing up in front of a live audience and doing improv theater. It scared the hell out of me. But here's the essence that I think that you can take away as school communicators is that our natural reaction to anything tossed at us is to go, yes, but. Improv theater, the essential lesson is yes, and. And the yes, and notion teaches you to think quickly, where something is tossed at you and you accept it. You go, yes, and. So in some ways, the real way we react is no, but. Yes, and. And it's a trick. It is a mental trick, but it's a skill. It's a talent by which you learn to react. We just happened to recall.
Hold on just 1 second. Someone, could everybody mute their audio? Hold on, I'm going to mute some things here.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. I think we're back at it now. Did I mute you?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, there you are.
Where were we?
Well, we were talking about the speed of communication in your improv training, mm-hmm. As we should. But that leads me to, do we need to work on being quicker on our feet, though? I mean, yes, take the time, but is that a skill we kind of need to think about developing a little bit more because of the age we live in?
But, the caution is that, the purpose of improv theater is to be funny.
Right.
Task.
No.
But it seems to me that learning to think quickly is a good skill to have. And isn't there a book, and I can't think of, I think that his name is Taleb or something like that, but it's Think Fast, Think Slow or something like that. I've not read it, okay. But I like the notion, because there are times we do have to learn to think fast, but the value of thinking slowly, of taking time. But and this is a kind of the function of when you got a letter, you could take time to respond to it, and then faxes came in and you had to respond quicker. Now email, it's like you send it out and 2 seconds later you go, why haven't they responded?
That's so true. When this is maybe, this is kind of fads, trends, whatever. Just if you have any advice in this area, I think a lot of us, because our audience is so broad, we need to reach our students, we need to reach their parents, we need to reach their grandparents in many cases, and we need to reach our community, which has, ages from 0 to 100. What's your best advice how do we reach such a broad audience? Are there like, what would be the best advice to try and go that many directions?
Well, I think there is a sense of that we respond to principles, and that in many ways is the essence of story. That in stories there are essential, almost archetypal things that we respond to. But here's how you can use fads. Fads are about grabbing attention. It's new, it's different. So, do I have to pay attention to that? So what you do is you use fads, but in that sense, are you using the right colors, the right fonts, the right images that appeal to that particular constituency? So what kind of things are going to appeal to young people? And it's really good to ask them, but then also really understand what they're saying. Because if you haven't noticed, young people will try to mess with your heads. And it's never good to use something that you think is cool, and somebody is going to say, that is so 10 seconds ago. Right.
Mm-hmm. We get a couple questions coming in? We have about 7 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them in to me. Would you consider yourself an optimist, pessimist, or neither, or both?
And the answer is yes. So here's a real interesting difference between optimism and pessimism, is that always choose optimism. It's practical. In a pinch, it works. If you think you're going to succeed, it just is naturally better than thinking it's not going to work. Don't be the Eeyore. Hope is a very different thing than optimism. You need both hope and optimism. And hope is one of the great theological virtues: hope, faith, love. And what's great is that they have a paradoxical sense to them. Hope is not about things going your way. Hope is having things not going your way and having them turn around. It's you fight the hopeless battle and still hope to win. You need optimism and hope. And given the current political crisis and how weird the world is, it's really good.
Yes, I think so. Can you run down those couple books, or if you have a couple others you want to throw in? Didn't get to write them down fast enough. Someone wants to know what's the reading list again?
So it's Curious by Ian Leslie, In Praise of Shadows by Junichiro Tanizaki. It is Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds. It is The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. And then any of the books by Brene Brown. I didn't read any of those, but I listened to them. And I just find TED Talks by any of these people. Mm. And those are great introductions to them. Another one I really like today is The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. And it's all about how can good people disagree about fundamental things. Mm. Yeah, and he directly looks at the split between liberals and conservatives.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. One thing that I took away from a couple of the videos that I was watching from you, customers are now coworkers. How do you see that playing out in our field as school communicators?
There are no more strict boundaries between occupations, between the clients or the student and the teacher, the parent and the school. The boundaries are blurred, and in part because information so freely flows. You cannot lie anymore. If you ever lie, you will be found out. So it's how do we be open, honest, clear? when sometimes we don't even know what those things are.
Mm-hmm.
And so that basic notion of come, let us reason together becomes an incredibly important concept for this day and age, is that those boundaries cannot be stripped.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is a desk is a dangerous place to observe the world.
The mystery-writer Jean McCaw said that. And, it means, again, that there's a great old saying, when scientists finally figure out where the center of the world is, there's a lot of people going to be disappointed to find out it's not them. Out from outside of your world. You cannot have any particular world exist in isolation and expect it to function well. Wealth comes from connections. And wealth is that which has value. So what are we not connecting? People, things, and ideas that we haven't connected, and yet once they connect them, we'll go, well, of course. That's where the future wealth is going to come from. And
future ideas. I mean, it was a couple weeks ago that I saw that and wrote it down. I think I need to put it above my desk here, because you do need to get out, and it's still about, we kind of come full circle here, that face-to-face communication, actually word of mouth, making those connections in the relationships.
Mm-hmm. When I was teaching, I would put 3 quotations on the board, and one would be futuristic, one would be funny, and one would be profound. And I never, ever would talk about them.
Oh.
But their brain drifts. I would find students looking up there, and a number of times they would come up afterwards and go, I really like that one, or I don't understand that one.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's subtle, it's background, and it's there.
Were they always the same?
No. Every class I have different ones up.
Huh. We have like 2 minutes left. What's that?
I collect quotations. I have a database of over 4,000. I've been collecting since junior high.
Any favorites you want to throw out there to end the topic?
Sure. Eden Philpotts was an English writer, and he said, the universe is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah.
I like that. I think that's a perfect ending, actually. What we all need to do, right? David Zach, thank you so much for joining us. It was very insightful. That was a very fast 45 minutes, I just have to say. So really appreciate it. And I think we all have some reading to do, and we all need to get out of our desks now, right?
Okay, my work here is finished.
Work here is finished. Thank you so much. Have a great week. And thanks everybody for joining in. Again, if you want to tweet out some things that you heard, use the hashtag #SCNLunchandhour. And we look forward to talking with you again the next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.